Well, good morning, Geoff.
Good morning, Cam.
Welcome to everybody online. This is Geoff Waddington, our Vice President of the IMS. We're a bit sad in head office today because Geoff hasn't joined us in person, as he usually does. Lovely biscuits. But we'll look forward to visiting next time, Geoff.
Indeed.
Discussion this morning with Geoff is marine surveying is an unregulated industry. Why? Geoff will discuss this, and I think Mike is going to interact as well with you. So over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to all. Yeah, the topic here today is marine surveying is an unregulated industry. So this is more of a discussion rather than a lecture, really, because basically that says it all. As Cam said, I'm due to be the next president of the IMS from June next year. And during my time as a board member and vice president, I've continued to pursue professional accreditation for marine surveyors with a view to getting the regulation into the industry that it needs. So I hope that during my time as president, I'm going to see some more progress towards this. But I'm realistic about this, and I know that things take time. So I don't expect it to happen overnight. But somebody's got to make a start. There'll be some resistance from existing surveyors, I'm sure, who probably don't share these views. But as an industry, we do need to move forward, and we need to move with the times. So this subject of getting accreditation for surveyors has been a bit of an elephant in the room, really, for years. I think all the other authorities in marine surveying have all thought about it and all talked about it, but nobody's ever done anything about it. Because as marine surveyors yourselves, you'll probably realise that you got into this through various avenues. You were maybe professional engineers, maybe skippers of ships. You could be a builder of boats in the past. You just might have a love of boats and a lot of knowledge of boats. But it's the professionalism that we've got to bring up. So the people we want are people with a professional background in marine surveying. And even those, and like myself, many years ago in the 80s, when I was conducting marine surveys as a part-time pastime, if you like, which later then became my full-time job. And in those days, I didn't know what I needed to be a marine surveyor. And I can remember having a conversation with a guy in the pub, and he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing marine surveying at the moment, and I think perhaps that's the way forward." And he said to me, he said, "But you're not qualified." And it's sort of, excuse me. And he said, "Well, you're not qualified to be a marine surveyor, are you?" And to be honest, I didn't know what I needed to do to be qualified as a marine surveyor. So it sort of put me on the back foot, really. And then I started to look into it, and I found out that there is no qualification for marine surveyors. So this can't be right. How can you be a marine surveyor without being qualified? And this is where it all started from. And there again, one's got to remember that times have changed. Many, many years ago, a large boat, like in 1969, a showstopper at the boat show would have been 45 feet long, which is not a very big boat. But nowadays, a boat of around that size or 50 feet could be £1 million. So the industry has changed as well. And I think we need to change with the industry. So you need to be have the experience, the knowledge, and you need to be a professional, because otherwise we're falling behind other industries. I mean, just as an instance, our industry being unregulated, nearly all the other industries are regulated. I mean, the building industry, you can't be a surveyor in the building industry unless you're a chartered surveyor. But chartered status isn't something that the marine surveyor can achieve at the moment. So the concern is that our jobs are often of greater value than the building surveyor. How many building surveyors have looked at a building that costs more than £60 million? Because I know that I've looked at boats that cost more than £60 million. So he needs to be professionally recognised, but I don't. This can't be right. We need to sort this out. The problem is in order to get some legislation passed, a white paper has to be raised, and it's a long and torturous path, really. At the end of the day, it needs to be industry driven. So we're looking at insurers particularly, who need to ensure that the surveyor that they're using, or that the surveyor that they're accepting, is professionally qualified and is capable of doing the work that they require. And it's up to them really to say, well, I'm not happy with this surveyor, but I am happy with that surveyor. What we've got to do is sort of give them the option to have an accredited surveyor or not. And this is where the IMS is intending to go. So as you're all listening out there, and this is a discussion, how do the people that are listening out there feel about this? Because you will have all come from different backgrounds. Do you consider yourselves to be suitably qualified to be a marine surveyor, or what's your thoughts about what's required in the qualifications of a marine surveyor? Anybody? No?
Keep going, Geoff. We're all listening to you every word.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. I just wondered if I'd get some feedback. So, yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about myself for a minute then, and where I came from. I was an engineer originally. I joined the Royal Navy in 1970 as a baby engineer, working on steamships, and I gradually worked my way up to become what was known as an artificer. And an artificer in the Navy is the skilled craftsman of the Royal Navy, and they are trained to do virtually everything. Unfortunately, when a ship is away from land, you can't call on a plumber or a welder or a woodworker or anything else for that matter. So the artificer is the man who is on board the ship who has to fix things. Brilliant, because the MOD are very, very good at offering training for artificers. So every time a training course was offered, I'll put my hand in the air. Yep, I'll do that. So pretty soon, as a mechanical engineer in the Navy, they decided that they need somebody to learn non-destructive testing. So then I got into NDT. And NDT, when gas turbines came along, became even more technical because of vibration analysis and an oil analysis. So that was one sub qualification that then you can pick up. The next one is well, we need shipwrights, because we no longer have any shipwrights. Would any engineers like to train to be a shipwright? Put the hand in the air, off you go. Shipwright training college, do 6 months there, 18 months of on-job training to try and learn the other aspects of being a shipwright. Then along comes another request. We need people to work with pipes, so we need pipe welders. Well, hands in the air again, off I go to become a qualified pipe welder. And so it went on. Structural welder, yeah, I'll do that. So we did the structural welder. Then you get drafted to the South Atlantic, where you have to weld aluminium ships together because they're all cracking and falling apart. Okay, I'll become an aluminium welder. So off you go for specialist non-ferrous aluminium welding courses and stainless steel. And so you do that. And then you avoid being picked to go and work on nuclear submarines, because I didn't want to do that. But all along the way, you're picking up all these various trades. So you're a boat builder, you're a plumber, you're a welder, you're an engineer. People might say you're a jack of all trades, really, and I suppose in a way you are, but it's a really good background for what then I wanted to do when I left the Navy. So after a short spell at university to upgrade my qualifications, I then went and ran a shipyard for 6 years, where I was repairing ships and large yachts and working with, strangely, lots of surveyors, because along with the shipyard came the surveyors. So we had the Lloyd's surveyor, the DNV surveyor, the Bureau Veritas surveyor, the independent surveyor, the damage surveyors, the loss adjusters, the US Army surveyors, lots of work with those. And what I found was that the only surveyors really who had any form of training was really the Lloyd's surveyors. The Lloyd's surveyors took on apprentices. I remember particularly Sam Spinks, sadly passed away, but he was always prevalent in my shipyard. And one day he turned up with a young lady in tow who was a young trainee surveyor. Unfortunately, he should have been more proactive, really, in making sure that she was dressed appropriately, because a lady in a skirt in a shipyard didn't go down too well. Or rather, it did go down very well with my men. She was escorted down to an Icelandic fishing vessel on the end of my jetty, and the captain of the fishing vessel decided that his cabin was the best place for her to get changed into her overalls. And in the end, we had to separate him from his cabin with some force, because he was very determined to look after this young lady. But perhaps that wasn't, the ideal. Yes. Okay, sorry, I thought somebody was at the door. So I'm not sure what her career was, but I understood from the Lloyd surveyor that the idea was that they would send them off to shipyards, probably in the Far East, to gain experience. And basically they moved around the world, gaining experience in various disciplines as a surveyor. But there again, we're back to the old nutshell again. What was their background? I mean, obviously she wasn't an engineer. She may have a degree. She may have had a degree somewhere along the line. I don't know. But her qualifications in marine surveying was based purely upon experience. So this is a catch-22 situation again. How does the surveyor gain experience without being a surveyor? And if you're a surveyor without experience, again, you're in an unregulated industry. And so it goes on. We go round in circles. So what does the marine surveyor need to know, and what experience does he need? The marine surveyor needs to understand the processes behind the defects that he's likely to find. So it's all very well, the definition of a surveyor, as I'm sure if you go in the dictionary and look up surveyor, you'll see that the definition is an observer. Well, anyone can look at something and say, that ain't right. But it's knowing what's not right about it, and how it could be improved, and why it isn't right. So is that the right material for that thing to be made of, or is that the wrong material? What is the right material? And it's the understanding behind what you're seeing so that you can explain it and not end up in court. So it's what is it? What is it that you're looking at? You need to be able to describe it. You need to know where it is, what it is, and how it is, and whether or not it's suitable, how it could be improved, and what are the potential consequences of not fixing the defect, which obviously can be catastrophic, especially if the keel falls off. So in all disciplines, there needs to be an awareness of the requirements of the process. So it doesn't matter what sort of surveyor you are, you need to know what needs to be done, basically. As a small craft surveyor, I ended up putting yachts on ships, and then all of a sudden, I'm a cargo surveyor. How did that happen? Well, I'm not a cargo surveyor. Well, you are, because you know about boats and you know how to secure them on a ship. Yeah, but that doesn't make me a cargo surveyor, but apparently it did. So, and this is how careers can go, so we need to do something about this. It needs to be a regulated industry. Somebody needs to say, this is what you need to be. This is how qualified you need to be. And then an accreditation needs to be sorted out so that the people that instruct you, the insurers, the P&I clubs, the general public who want a surveyor to come in and tell them what's right and wrong with their boat, they need to know that the person that they're instructing is the right person. But somebody's got to lay down the infrastructure and the level at which the professional qualification is required to be. So the IMS is starting an accreditation scheme, which is probably why Mike's listening with interest here, because he's very foremost in trying to drive this forward. And we have started the process with the MCA, because coding surveyors who are responsible for assessing commercial vessels to be appropriate for carrying fare-paying passengers, which at the end of the day is the biggest risk in the industry, because there is no cargo more valuable than people. And so that when you're a coding surveyor and you give a license to a ship or a vessel to carry people, then you're on very, very dangerous ground if you don't know what you're doing. So the MCA have decided that a lot of surveyors who were undertaking this work weren't doing so to the correct standard, because there was no standard. The standard was the coding, the blue book, the red book, the yellow book, and the brown book. So these codes were the standard, but unfortunately these codes are very open to interpretation. So it left it down to the surveyor to be the person who says, this is right, this is what you need to do, I'm not happy with that. And so at the end of the day, he's the person who's responsible. And he's the person that signs the piece of paper to say that he's inspected the vessel and he's happy with the condition of the vessel and that it can have a commercial license. And then that license is issued and he remains the surveyor for that vessel and for the next 5 years, or until somebody else takes over from him. And anything can happen in those 5 years. And as we know recently, anything that does happen reflects immediately back to the surveyor. And I won't go into details, but I know Mike knows exactly what I'm talking about. But we all know about Cheeky Rafiki with the keel falling off, and other vessels where the keels have fallen off, which I won't mention names of, because they may still be under investigation. So this is where we needed to have some sort of professional accreditation for a marine surveyor. And at last, the MCA decided this is a good idea. So what we have to do now is we have to make sure that all the surveyors within the industry who are licensed to do codings, which could be with the SCRMS, it could be with the IMS, it could be with the YDSA, it could be with MECAL, they all have to come to a certain standard. And this standard will be ratified by the MCA, and then that will have to be what each surveyor will have to achieve. And Mike is well involved. Exactly what's your title, Mike?
Well, can I jump in briefly, Geoff? Yeah, I'm the chairman of the Professional Standards, or the Certifying Authority Professional Standards Working Group.
Yeah.
I took that role on from John Fernley 4 years ago. And if I'm honest, it's taken us 4 years to get the other organisations around the table to understand that we are stronger together rather than working independently. And just to bring you bang up to date, because I've not had a chance to speak to you since Friday, we had a meeting of all the certifying authorities with the MCA in attendance. We were actually looking at the base questions, which will form the basis, obviously, of the certification. We hope to have something in place for people to start having a little look at probably by July, August of next year. The certification process is scheduled to roll out. In other words, the first people can come forward from January 2021, and they will have 12 months until January 2022, at which point, if they've not gained the badge, let's call it that, got the accreditation successfully, they will not be allowed to code vessels. So this is quite draconian. we have to be very careful that we don't set a standard that is going to wipe out half of the UK coding examiners. That is not well. You know, there are 5,500 vessels in the British fleet. You have to be very, very careful that we don't suddenly find we've only got 30 surveyors, and you know, that doesn't work. But equally, we do need to find a system that's robust, that tests people knowledge. And it's not a memory test, I should point that out as well. Whilst this is disruptive change and there is no grandfathering, it's not about trying to test people on MGN 280, which is a hundreds and hundreds of page thick document. So it'll be open testing. But at the end of the day, we do want to know that anyone who is involved in doing MCA coding knows when and how to apply the code, which code, and so on and so on. So yeah, it's coming, and it's an exciting piece of work. And of course, alongside this, we're now developing the marine surveying practitioner accreditation scheme, as you said. I'll be quiet for now.
No, exactly. I think you went straight back to where I was, which is where this huge document which points you in the right direction, but at the end of the day, it's down to the individual surveyor. And you are responsible, well, you're partly responsible in setting a level at which these surveyors must achieve. And it's interesting, it's going to be really interesting to see how that goes. And I'm sure we're not going to axe half the surveyors, but I'm sure that most of them are eminently qualified, because I think certainly we assess our coding surveyors internally, and they have to have a certain level of knowledge and experience. And we have actually a verbal exam, which the chairman of the CA authority will sit on, to make sure that before you get your badge to go and do your CA work for the IMS, you are actually proven to know what you're talking about. Unfortunately, some of the other authorities did not be quite so stringent. But no, it's great that we're actually going in the right direction, I think is the expression really there. So, and I hope that this is going to continue, and I'm sure it will. The next step really is to get the accreditation for marine surveyors up and running. Unfortunately with that is that we haven't got a big brother sitting on our shoulder like the MCA to say yay or nay to it, because at the end of the day the MCA is part of the Department of Transport, which is linked to the government, and they have the weight of the government and legislation behind them. So what the MCA can do is actually lay down the law. Once we get into the private marine surveying accreditation scheme, there is no law behind us. So that's where it starts getting difficult in the future, when we need to get law, which is legislation, in place to say that this is the standard that private marine surveyors need to achieve. But as I said earlier, when I started out in this, somebody's got to start somewhere. It's all very well everyone talking about it, but at least we are, as an institute, doing something about it. And if we start the ball rolling now, then perhaps in 5-10 years time, maybe that's a bit optimistic, but maybe in 10 years time we will get there. I may never see it, but somebody's got to start somewhere, and I think it's great that the IMS have decided to be the people to stick their head above the parapet and actually take this difficult subject on and drive it forward. And I think it's great, and I think that Mike's doing a splendid job in driving it, and I'm very pleased with that. So I linked to this. I recently wrote a letter to the yachting and boat building fraternity, because as marine surveyors we are aware of professional standards within boat building as well, and their professional standards are of course monitored by the authorities, sort of Lloyd's. In the past, most British vessels were built to Lloyd's 100A1 or some standard or other. And even in accordance with the RCD as it stands now, all vessels have to be built in accordance with a certifying authority standard. However, there are things that fall through the cracks. And this is where the surveyor comes in, because the surveyor is really the man who polices the industry. We're the ones that look at what's being produced and find the problems that have been allowed to be built into a production vessel. And so this generated a letter which I wrote, because at the end of the day, a boat is not the same as a car. So in the car world, you've got MOTs. If you break down at the side of the road, you can get out of your car and sit on the grass verge. Doesn't quite work with a boat. Department of Transport wise, we've got in the aircraft industry, you've got the CA. So you've got there's a standard which aircraft have to be built with, which is policed and investigated by a Department of Transport authority, much the same as the MCA. So even if you buy white goods for your house, there is a certain standard that they have to achieve. It used to be the kite mark in the old days. There are ISOs and there are standards, CE marks, of course, which have to be done. But still, tumble dryers burst into flames. Then there is be a general recall, and all your tumble dryers will have to be sent home, or they'll come around and collect your tumble dryer and give you a new one. But this doesn't happen in the marine world. It'd be lovely if somebody would come around and take your second-hand boat off you because it's got a problem and give you a new one. But I don't think that's likely to happen. So it's not a level playing field. And at the end of the day, a boat is only suitable for what it's designed to be. So there are different standards in the boat building industry. That's why we have inshore vessels and offshore vessels and ocean-going vessels. So there are varying standards, and one has to appreciate that a vessel should be used within its capability. But there again, that goes for all the other parts of the industry as well. You don't buy a car and then use it to plough a field, you know, and you don't buy a jet aeroplane and try and land it on a grass football pitch. So there are different standards in all the industry, but ours is still unregulated, whereas all the others are. And this is why it's generated this discussion, really, is to find out what people think and what their thoughts are in how this can be changed, what's right and what's wrong with the industry, basically. And I know Mike's very generously helping me out here, but I'm not getting an awful lot of feedback from anybody else here. It would be great to hear what other people think about this.
I'm stum, Geoff. I'm staying stum for now.
Yeah. So feedback.
Derek, do you wish to speak? You've unmuted your microphone. No? Keep going, Geoff.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, so it's, all this is all very well and good. But the marine industry manufacturers need to take their responsibility seriously. This is what basically I was trying to say. But as we know, they inherently don't. So you can have, this is where in a professional organisation like the IMS, the best thing about it is networking, and it's people talking to other people, and you learn problems with boats that you may not have encountered yourself, but because you're talking to somebody who has, then he can pass that information on to you, and then that means that the next time you go and look at a boat of that type, you're forearmed because you've got the information there. You think, oh yes, I know this boat's got a particular problem with this, and you can go straight to it and then make sure that you don't fall into the trap of missing it. And that's why networking and having small craft working group meetings in the IMS, which I always found very valuable, it's a good way of making sure that the surveyor has a broader base of knowledge about the vessels that he's looking at. Unfortunately, there are lawyers behind all this who will say, well, you've got to be very careful about naming names because you could be liable. So one can has to be a bit general about it. I know that if you go, and one thing I do is I go on the internet and I look and find out who's actually posting information on the internet, past owners of boats. There's an awful lot of chat, scuttlebutt goes on out there, as they call it. So it's a case of, well, I've had one of these boats. Has anyone else out there got one? Because I've got this problem. And I think, although there may be a potential for these individuals to be called and banged to rights over this, it's something that doesn't seem to happen. It's very good. I find it very useful. But of course, you do get a lot of personal issues enter into it, where somebody will say, well, I'm not happy with this type of boat, and somebody else will say, well, I'm very happy with that type of boat. So you're always going to get that sort of issue. But at the end of the day, all information is good information, and it needs to be put out there. It's no good allowing these things to go on and boats to fail just because nobody wants to stand up and say, don't go out to sea in one of those boats because the keels are dodgy. You know, somebody's got to do it. And in order to stand up and say these sort of things, you need to be experienced and professionally qualified to do so, because you'll end up in court. And this is another place where your professional accreditation will be tested to the nth degree, is once you get to the expert witness stage of being a marine surveyor, where I've been on many occasions, and you're up in court. You may even be up against another marine surveyor who is the expert for the other side. So you now have two experts arguing against each other as to what was right or what was wrong with a particular vessel. And whether you're going to win or lose is dependent upon how professional you are and whether you know more about the subject than the other fella. But the expert witnesses are picked by judges, especially in joint witness instructions, or by lawyers. And lawyers use an expert witness register, and you don't have to be a particularly professionally qualified person to get on the expert witness list. But you may be chosen, and you may end up in a legal battle. You may end up in court. And if you're proved not to know what you're talking about, you are then liable. So it's one of those things where I think when you get to the expert witness level of being a marine surveyor, you're then sticking your head above the parapet. You're the person then who's saying, I know better than the other fella. I'm an expert in this particular case, and I'm the right person for the job. And you really have to be sure of your ground before you do that. So this leads me on to another thing that's going to link to the accreditation scheme, because when this accreditation scheme eventually takes off, which I'm hoping it'll be starting next year, you will not be accredited as a marine surveyor in all disciplines. We found over the last few years, during professional assessment committee work, where we have members or people who are applying to be members, and we're assessing their professional capabilities and basically their background, and whether or not they can do what they say they do. And there are a list of disciplines which are attached to an application. So you can be a specialist in FRP, you can be a specialist in steel boats, you could be a specialist in rigs, engines, all sorts of different specializations. And a lot of people put down, oh yeah, I tick all the boxes. So I'm a specialist in, I think Mike had somebody the other day who said he was a specialist in 25 different specialisms. And well, you can't be a specialist in 25 different specialisms. You might know 25 different disciplines, but you're not a specialist in them. And so then you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to take yourself to one side and sort of say, what do I really know a lot about? And then that's your specialism. because when the accreditation scheme comes in, you will only be accredited to those things that you are unproven to be a specialist in. It won't be a carte blanche, you can do anything, open ticket. So that'll be another restriction excuse me, that'll be built into it. So when it comes out, and people who are recent members of the Institute now will be aware of this, because they will have fallen foul of the assessment committee sort of saying, well, I think that you should have a license or a specialism of this, this and this, and that's what we will accredit you as a member for, but you won't be accredited as a member for that and that, which you think you might be. So that's another link to our accreditation scheme, which I'm hoping that that we're going to get off the ground next year. Because it won't be mandatory in the early stages. It will be a case of surveyors can sign up to it because it will be to their benefit to be accredited. So initially, it'll be a case of preference, really. That somebody will say, well, I'd like to be an accredited marine surveyor because I think, A, that gives me the accreditation, it gives me the ability to show my clients, my instructing clients, that I have achieved something, and it will also put you on a list of accredited surveyors where people who are looking for an accredited surveyor will find you. So there is a benefit to being an accredited surveyor, and we're hoping that initially people will sign up to the scheme to try and get that accreditation to improve their professional status before it becomes mandatory, which hopefully in the fullness of time it will. Any comments on that, Mike?
Lots of comments, really, Geoff. What we're trying to do is to assess competency, and assessing competency is a very difficult thing to do. So I think you have to define, first of all, what an industry acceptable standard is for marine surveying in the various different channels of surveying, and then you go from there. If I asked you, Geoff, what is your specialism or specialisms? How many might you venture towards? You see, it's not easy, is it? It's not easy. But it is getting people to say, no, I'm a specialist at that. That's not to say people can't also, exactly as you said, say, but I also have knowledge in these other areas of marine surveying. But my specialism is here. So these are challenging things. And I guess accreditation, if you look in the UK, not talking about the rest of the world, but I have done a lot of research in the UK. If you are a coffin maker, yes, a coffin maker in the UK, there is an accreditation scheme for you.
Really?
Yes, absolutely true. There is an accreditation scheme for coffin makers. Equally, if you touch rightly on house surveyors, the building trade now in the UK, checker trade came along. Now, I don't think I would engage a builder now before I'd had a look at checker trade and had a look at the comments to see whether or not the builder or the roofer or the glazier I'm about to use has got some good reviews and is competent. And checker trade, actually, if you look at how they do their accreditation scheme, is pretty stringent.
Is it? See, now that's interesting, because I've heard otherwise. I've heard people say, well, checker trade is a waste of space because they'll just take anyone. So that's interesting.
Go and read the page. I'd recommend you have a read of the page on how they offer the accreditation and what they ask people to do. It is quite draconian. That's
right.
Not to say, however, that rogues don't get in and people get through the system. So that's just one of those unfortunate things, but it does happen. IMS, and indeed any other membership organisation, is only as strong as its weakest member. And that's the reality of all of these things. So it is a collective effort to try and drive the standards up. And of course, the other challenge we face, I think, and I'd be interested to get your comment, Geoff, is that different standards are acceptable around the rest of the world. There are certainly parts of Asia where standards are incredibly low. And are very poor. And the challenge for us is going to be, I think, moving the bar higher in those areas.
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting point, really, because one tends to think of setting these standards as being a standard for a British marine surveyor. And of course, it's very easy to forget that the IMS is a global organisation, and you're quite right. Interestingly, I know that in Australia, they have set standards for marine surveyors. And I also know that they have three, and I'm sure that I'm right here, I'm sure it's three standards for commercial offshore vessels. I think there's you can have one to a Queensland state standard, you can have one to another. I think there are three different standards, whereas we only have one for commercial vessels. I think they have three. I may be wrong, it might be more. I don't know, but at least they do have a standard out there. The Americans, well, it's always been a bit of a closed shop in America because America does this with a lot of their things. If you have a commercial vessel in America, then the captain has to be American. Now, there's a good rule for you. That makes sure that all your skippers are actually Americans, and so that keeps employment in America. And I think America's always been good like that. They've always given a license to an American contractor in preference to anybody else to make sure that the work stays within America. A bit of Donald Trump's America first, I think, coming in there. So, yeah, there are, but then you go to third world countries and oh, God, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I sent one of my young surveyors out to Hong Kong to do a big sunseeker that was being taken out of the water there, and he was absolutely horrified. He came back with these stories of bits of bamboo that they were using for the scaffolding around the boat, and people undertaking work in flip-flops and shorts. He said there was no health and safety, there was nothing. It was pulled up, a piece of greasy timber was used as the slipway to pull this thing out of the water. Some guy put a mask on and dived in to make sure it was sat on the blocks properly. Although how he could see through the water with all the floating dead rats and the rest of it, he said, I don't know. But the whole experience completely blew him away. It was so alien to him from what he'd seen as a university graduate and as marine surveyor in Britain, to go to China to see what it's like out there was just, worlds apart. And India, I think, like much the same. So yes.
That said, there are some fantastic surveyors in those areas. So it's about matching a standard to them and making sure that we can get these people through a scheme. But I don't want to start developing individual schemes for individual countries. This is an international standard that we are creating. And it's worth I just continue slightly on this vein. I have gone public now, I think 4 times. I've given presentations, and the feedback has been quite extraordinary. All very positive. People are saying, well, the industry needs this, we are supportive. But we've done a lot of research, as I think Geoff, because we've reported back on this, amongst P&I clubs, insurers, brokers, for anybody who engages a marine surveyor. So we've got this wider group of, if you like, a focus group who are very much helping us steer this. And it is interesting. I had a chat with a guy called Harry Subramanian, who runs the Ship Owners Club, P&I Club out in Singapore. He has a huge fleet of vessels. And he said to me, if you develop a scheme and you come along and tell me that that man over there is an expert in a gas tanker or understands how gas tankers work and how to survey them, he said, when I need a gas tanker specialist, I'll be giving him work. So it's very powerful, very, very powerful.
No, I'm sure eventually it will. Once word gets out and people know where they can go to find an accredited marine surveyor, they'll go to that site and they'll look for that accredited surveyor. It will. The industry will drive itself, will it not?
It will, and I suppose if I can refer back to the work that we've done with the Marine Surveying Academy, which, for those of you who don't know, is our wholly owned subsidiary of the IIMS. the scheme that we developed for the International Marine Contractors Association, on behalf of their guys who do their ECMID work. ECMID is the Common Marine Inspection Document. It's not a survey, but it's an audit on vessels essentially working in the offshore industry, offshore sector. And they had a very real problem because people were getting on board these complex vessels and no one had a clue whether or not these people were actually knowledgeable. So if you're going to get on board a complex jackup and do an audit, if you don't know what a jackup is, you shouldn't be anywhere near a vessel like that. So Inconnu, they had a problem. 5 years further down the line, we now have a very robust scheme. I think we have something like 600 people have applied for accreditation, and I think we've managed to put, 480 or something through the scheme successfully, and they've got the badge. So, you know, it's all possible and it's doable, but they are hard yards, Geoff, not going to be easy.
Oh no, I mean, we do the paint inspectors as well, and I think that was a very important one to get off the ground because an awful lot of surveyors were falling foul of paint inspection.
Yeah.
And it's really, really serious money on super yachts, on paint coatings. But we've achieved the accreditation there, and that's working very well. So, and I think, you know, I think we'll get there.
It's also worth just pointing out as well that, you know, I've had dialogue with YDSA, with SCMS. Both are very, very keen to be involved in this scheme and to offer it out to their members. So that instantly brings, if you like, the three UK membership marine surveying organisations together. It doesn't mean we're going to merge or anything, but it means that we'll have a common standard that we can get behind. So they've sat in meetings with us. I'm now talking to SAMS in America, early stages of talking to SAMS. So, you know, there is great interest in this around the world. And I think you're absolutely right. When you look just at so many professions now, I can think of very, very few professions anywhere in the world that does not have some form of certification, accreditation, you know, whatever you want to call it. I mean, in the UK, I have a little bit of experience in the optical world. My partner, Joy, works in the optician's business. And, you know, they're struck off. If they don't maintain their certification and do their CPD, continuing professional development, they're not going to be practicing as an optician next year. And I'm not suggesting we're quite as draconian as that with marine surveyors. And the other thing I would say to caveat all of this is, whilst we will raise the bar, unfortunately, we will never, ever get rid of those guys who are at the bottom, who will continue to operate and are prepared to get out of bed for £100 a survey. You know, they are always going to be there. But over time, as the accreditation and the badge starts to gain some meaning, and we do a bit of work with the consumers and brokers and so on, the reality is that, you know, it should all slot into place in time, but it will take time.
Well, that's why I think it will take time, because you've got to wait for these guys to retire, and then you've got fresh people coming through who are accredited. And it's diluting, really. It's diluting what's out there until eventually you've got all good stuff. You know, I mean, interesting with the opticians, though, that didn't used to be the case many years ago, did it? Anyone could be an optician, couldn't they?
Well, what a horrendous thought, because, you know, what optics is, you can see all sorts of illnesses through the eye. That so the fact that, you know, that could have been unregulated is unthinkable, really.
Yeah.
So, but we're on the path. The path of travel is positive, and as Geoff said, I'm hoping we will have something ready to roll out on a soft launch by the middle of next year, June, July, hopefully, with a view to sort of a much harder launch towards the end of the year. But as I said, I'm very keen to work with our partners, people like the major P&I clubs who've all said, you know, we're supportive of this initiative. So
Sure.
It's all good. It's all positive, really.
Good. No, absolutely. We're not overrunning here, are we, Mike?
You've got about another 2 or 3 minutes, Geoff. If you
okay. Obviously, it must be my watch then. My watch is saying nearly 10 to. I was thinking I'm going to get shouted at in a minute.
Oh, you've got another 2 or 3 minutes if you want to do a quick wrap up.
No, I think that's really a good place to wrap it up. Really, is the fact that we, as an industry, as the IMS, as an institute, we've actually started to set the bar. and that it is that close as next year, and I think it's terribly exciting, really, to think that at last something is happening, because I said earlier, it has been the elephant in the room, hasn't it? I mean, the YDSA, when you spoke to them about it, they said, "Oh, well, yeah, we've often thought about this, you know," and they're not the only ones, you know. SCMS the same; they've all thought about it, but nobody's ever done anything about it. And I think it was just an unwillingness of the institutes, the various institutes, of not being the one to stand up and sort of say, this needs to be done. Nobody wanted to go that extra mile, you know. And I think it's great that we have, and that we have the backing of the other institutes behind us. Because now that we've decided to stick our head above the parapet, everyone else is going, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So yeah, why didn't we do that? You know, well, why didn't you do that? You know, so I think it's great. I really do, and I think it's good for our institute, and I think it's good for the industry. I really do.